Greetings and salutations, all you truly beautiful individuals. It is another episode of League Unlocked. Eric and Mark here with you guys for a little historical rehash, fresh off of a little bit of first stand action. I think it's only fair to, strike while the iron is hot, as they say. And we're asking the age-old question. You always got to talk greatest of all time to stir up a little drama. And is Bin sitting atop the mountain of a pretty impressive lineup of all-time top laners, but is Bin the GOAT of the top lane? That's what we're chatting today.
I think it's a very fascinating conversation, and especially it's going to be something that really gets to the core of just how much you put the value of a world championship, that ultimate prize at the end of it all type of thing. Or are you looking at the entire body of work, the entirety of the year, what it takes to be a dominant presence from the beginning of a split all the way until we're saying goodbye to that season at the end of the year? And I think that is absolutely the core of that question. And it is, of course, very topical given the recent addition to the resume Bin has picked up with First Stand. And let's not pretend like that is absolutely the big thing putting him over the top into finally this conversation about being the best top laner of all time. But it certainly is something that brings it back to that forefront. And for me, it's still just short. I think I would still put him as somewhere in that second or third spot, depending on how you're flip-flopping them around. But I think the fact that I would throw him in that conversation, in that top three, top two type of category, and without that world championship to his name, should go to speak to the levels that he has accomplished elsewhere in this game.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think there is 100% an argument to be made, and for him not being at the top, not the greatest, and yes, First Stand is not the top line of this guy's resume that you would be talking about, but I feel like when you look at historically what Bin has done, and he's conquered, or I mean, I know not winning Worlds doesn't mean he's conquered it, but he's made the finals a couple times with two different squads, had some good World showings. We know what he's done at MSI, and I think the biggest thing for me is this guy in so many best of 5 series is like the game plan. Squads have to figure out and dance around pick ban the entire time because there's 4, 5, sometimes 6 different champions that you can't let this guy have, or he will completely take over a game. That's what we saw multiple times at First Stand, and again, we're now going on since he was a 17-year-old young kid with Suning, like 6 years straight, and you're looking at what was the biggest down year in Bin's career during that time, maybe last year with BLG, and I know he has his fair share of on the Rift drama that we have seen throughout his career, but the consistency has been there ever since he debuted as a rookie.
And that's something that I think is unique to Bin in this regard. When you are looking at some of the greatest top laners of all time, a lot of them, it's short runs, small stretches where they are able to be at that ultimate peak, be that dominant form in that top side. It's been that entire story for the entire career of Bin so far. Yes, various small dip downs in performance and everything else, but more or less always there when you needed him, always willing to take on the big performance and the big risks and make it work for his squad. That's one of the things that Bin has always brought to the table and has been very special about him as one of these top players in this ranking. And again, it really comes towards that heart of the question where it is, how much are you weighing that world championship? Because I know, again, for a lot of people, it will be of that very significant, the most significant thing that you can add to your resume. But that doesn't mean it's the only thing that you are counting in when you're evaluating a player's greatness and whatever and everything else like that. And again, I think Bin has been so phenomenal, so exceptional in so many avenues for this time period that he has been in the entirety of his career that it is impossible to ignore this conversation even without that world championship to his name.
And I think the main guy most people are going to compare or have maybe in that one spot ahead of him is probably Zeus over now, of course, on Honourable Life. And crazy note, both of these guys are only 22, by the way. Both Zeus and Bin probably going to climb even higher on these lists. And yes, World Championships are the main thing, but now you can look at Zeus and say, okay, well, T1 actually won Worlds without him in that top lane with the exact same roster. And then you look at the domestic performances. Bin had 5 LPL titles across multiple 3 different organizations. Zeus only has 2, and one of those is kind of the, LCK Cup, which is the new format kind of thing. But there are World Championships will always be the highest and most coveted of them all, but there are things that you can pull and put in Bin's camp to put him ahead of Zeus as well.
Yeah, and I think that is again the heart of it all, really getting again to being how value is that world championship. When you're looking at a resume like Zeus's, it does a ton of heavy lifting, right? That is a big part of it. But I think you're right in mentioning that, well, yeah, it kind of lessens a little bit when you realize that, yes, T1 did find a way to win that world championship without him in that situation. So it doesn't feel quite as impressive or dominant of type of thing, even though that, again, that's like taking one thing of sugar out of the most sweet candy in the world type of thing. So yeah, it's still very impressive, but it's one of those ones where, again, if you are trying to remove those from the equation as much as possible, you're left with quite a discrepancy on the table in comparison to a player like Bin in that regard, even being the same age, playing for dominant teams, winning things and everything else. You're still looking at Bin in a different light at that regard until you're bringing the world championship trophies onto the table. And then I understand that is, of course, where the value is going to be different, and that is a personal thing to evaluate through. But the fact that you are having these two at that top, really is something special to acknowledge for the top laners.
Yeah, there's very much, I see both sides of the coin for these guys being 1, 2 in whatever order, but it becomes harder pressed to argue anyone else in those top 2 spots.
It certainly does, because the next level down that you go to is someone like TheShy. And TheShy has been a dominant presence, just like those two within that top side. He's got a world championship, not 2 the way that Zeus is rolling on through, but he still has one there. And again, not like IG has done it since then in that regard as well, is one of those things that he carries with him. But there's plenty, and I mean plenty, of peaks and valleys in your boy TheShy's career, and I don't think that is something that is comparable to Zeus and some of the struggles we have seen with him with Hanwha Life, and it is absolutely not comparable to any of the struggles or any down, heartbeats or moments we have seen from Bin throughout his time in the LPL. It's absolutely leagues apart, and the fact that we're talking about this around the difference between being in that 1 or 2 spot, and then this is 3, and it really does feel like quite a canyon of a gap of difference, is something of how impressive those first 2 players have been so early in their career.
And, TheShy is obviously far and away the most polarizing top laner you'll ever talk about. But what's fascinating to me about him is sometimes it almost feels like when Zeus or Bin have a bad game or get caught out, it's almost like people are not rooting for it, but they're like, see, told you they were overrated, like waiting to be able to call them out. When TheShy has TheShy moments where he's getting caught out, inting, running it down, it seems like there's more people to come to his defense and be like, yeah, but he's going to pop off on the next game. It's just a bizarre juxtaposition between these different top laners.
And I think that plays a little bit to the longevity that we have seen in his career. He has been around so long. We know exactly his style, all the pros, all the cons that come with rolling with TheShy in the top side and what dice roll you're taking there in that regards. But we all love it because we know that the good, the amazing, the eye-popping skills, the turnarounds are always there in the top side for him. It's just a matter of whether the number is rolling correct on the dice this time around for TheShy. And I think it's something to be said for a veteran player that, again, has been around that long, that you have built up that type of history, cheering for, cheering against, and seeing at that type of level. That is something that, again, goes into kind of the aura that TheShy brings and helps propel him to this type of spot in the rankings.
And I mean, truthfully, you talk about absolute pinnacle peak individual performance. You might have TheShy ahead of these other 2 guys in terms of against the rest of the competition. But the trophy case isn't there. You mentioned the one Worlds. There's only one LPL title. He hasn't got to finals in MSI. So the hardware that both Bin and Zeus have, again, at such a young age at 22, is why TheShy can't be sniffing that top 2 anymore.
Yeah, it really is. And again, it's one of those ones where that is, again, and we'll go through it as we keep moving down this list. You're going to realize these were previously the plateaus, the top players in these rankings type of situations. And that is just how impressive, how dominant both Zeus and Bin have been to insert themselves not only in this conversation, but at the very top of that conversation is truly one of the special things that I want to be taken away from something like this.
You want to talk about peak performance of an individual, and now, crazily enough, we got to start catering to some of the older heads to even talk about a guy like Smeb, who people are probably forgetting about with all the, recency bias of some of these guys and the consistencies, blah, blah, blah. But Smeb, one of the OG top lane gods. This is a guy who won back-to-back MVPs, the first LCK top laner with 1,000 kills under his name, and kind of now, famously or historically, the first guy we talked about, even though he doesn't play the same role as the main rival to Faker, because people were talking about Smeb, not just the best top laner for a 2-year, almost 3-year stretch, but the best player in the entire world.
I think that is enough of a statement there to tell you what type of highs we reached with a player like Smeb, that the fact that there was a period, 2016 Worlds, people were ranking him ahead of Faker. And again, this is not talking about, the previous, a handful of events that we have seen and done previews for, where again, in his age, in the time, in the changes of the game, he doesn't rank as highly. 2016, this is the top ranking guy. There is no question that you are putting Faker, and especially after what you have seen in 2015 and that 2016 year, that he is the top guy. But Smeb does enough. He showcases, wows people enough with his skill on the top side to get in that conversation. I think that is, again, something that was extremely special. One of the first guys that could motivate an organization to build out a super team to try and rival T1 and Faker and the dominance and dynasty that was showcasing out there from the early SKT days. Smeb is absolutely one of these ones where, unfortunately, it falls into the wayside of the old heads, the old guard. And when you're going through the highlights, it starts to look a lot different when you're looking at the game and the champions and the play styles that are coming through. Although you'll see a lot of rumble action in there. That's about as new age as it got for Smeb in those days, when we're calling it. But man, this one is a special one for me. And again, goes to show just how things have changed and evolved and grown and gotten stronger, that a guy like Smeb finds himself here on the list.
And listen, back then, it wasn't new, but it was less common to have a top laner that you were like, you're the carry. You're the guy that we're going to make the focal point and play style of our team. I know there was like the Juggernaut era in 2015, but 2014 through to 2016, it was a lot of you're on whatever flavor of the month tank duty it is. You're getting thrown on Maokai top over and over. It wasn't fearless. You could play Maokai 4 games in a row.
And where do you think the top lane island came from in these situations, where it simply was a different game altogether? You're playing on your own pace.
It's 4v4 the rest of the map. Yeah.
And then maybe around 28, 30 minutes, we might call you in for a teleport or something like that. Very different now. And again, it's one of those ones where it is a nice check mark in history to check in with someone like Smeb and the greatness that was his career and run, and then where we are nowadays in the top lane.
And you kind of have this transition where Smeb was kind of still the best top laner, but got some new rivals. And one of those rivals circa 2017 was King Kiin in that top lane on King Zone Dragon X. And this is another kind of polarizing guy. We know he talked, he talked his smack at various different midseason invitationals and other international events. But again, hasn't won the world championship, had some heartbreaking runner-up finishes both there and twice at the midseason invitational, but he's absolutely gotten it done in the LCK. How about winning titles with 3 different organizations domestically?
It's strange, and I know this might not exactly hit, but he almost feels like a more volatile version of TheShy. And I understand that's extremely scary when you're talking about a player like TheShy who already has that swing in his game. But I think you take it to another level with Kiin, the way that he could brutalize an enemy team in the top side and take it into the team fights, into flanking situations later. He is unfortunately, I think, probably out of all the top laners, the biggest victim of not having one of those big trophies really to back up and bolster his resume in that regard, because the game to game footage, the stats, everything else is all there that he is in this type of consideration. And you can only dream about where you would throw him in or how high he could truly reach with 1, maybe 2 world championships, MSIs thrown in there, whatever. But it never came to fruition with him, and that is absolutely the stain that will hold him back in that regard when you are looking at and comparing him to some of the other great players we've already talked about here at the top lane.
And again, some of those shortcomings are really to no fault of his own. He was still, a premier player. It's a full team game, but like 2017 Longshu, do yourself some favor, watch those highlights, because that was the first time that you saw someone, this is 2017 peak SKT dynasty, he was embarrassing them. He was styling on them in playoffs, and that had been unheard of to do to the Goliaths that are SKT.
And maybe it's a weakness in some regard, but I think it's just one of those angles that just makes him even more exciting, even more of that lethality that you want in your top side. Is he wasn't one of these vegan options. He isn't rolling through to just slap the tank fight up there in the top side and we'll see you later. This was I'm looking to put up some solo bolos. I want to have the excitement. I want the fire and flames in my lane. That was Kiin, and he brought it every single time. And I think that's one of those ones where, yeah, there is an angle to talk about having that diversity, the variety to your gameplay, to your champion pool. But I think taking it to the extremes, the way that Kiin did and was able to push it as a strategy, is something that I thought was an angle, an X factor that he brought that nobody else did in that top side.
Last guy on this list to talk about that gets his own board as an honor, and it feels bad even putting him this low. I wanted to climb him higher. You're talking about Kiin, because this guy, I mean, longevity is there. This is like 8+ years now. You're talking about him being a premier top laner, and he has been on some suffering in ELO hell. This guy is the only LCK player who has finished in every position. So he's finished 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th in the LCK. That's how bad some of those Africa Freaks teams were there. But one of the most mentally capable and sound players of all time.
And it's true that the longevity, the stability that he has brought is part of his name, is part of that legacy. It's also maybe the reason why we are still without that ultimate trophy, that ultimate championship for him. When you are looking at the resume, he laid it out every single position in the LCK. He's finished all the way through, top to bottom. And now it is the good times, because it's the ice cream run. It's the champagne of playing with Gen G and playing at that very top. But that comes with the added pressure and added weight that now these years are judged off of, do you win that world championship? Are you at that ultimate caliber level to a degree that isn't applied to any other previous years of careers for Kiin, or frankly, a lot of these guys ahead of him on the list, depending on the year or the team, organization, whatever. It hasn't lined up, and nobody has had it not line up the way that Kiin has had it not line up until now with Gen G. So it is kind of that, icy and hot and cold type of situation where you are looking at both angles of this one for Kiin, where there has to be that punishment, that hard, look at it where you're going, well, there's no championship. Come on, what's going on? You're on Gen G, but you're still going, yeah, but What about like 8-9 years of Afrika? That's got to count for something. Slugging and slumming your way through the LCK and still being this talented, this profession of a top laner at the end of the day when you're looking at a top level team like Gen G, that's got to count for something when you're looking at someone like Kiin.
Yeah, and I know all the trophies, titles that he has gotten have come since he joined Gen G, and all these other guys on the list were the guy on their squads, at least at times. And I know Kiin's on a star-studded Gen G, so he's maybe not the guy, but he has far and away been from being a passenger princess on this squad. He has absolutely been even better on Gen G than even some of these suffering Afrika Freak squads because he's been more opened up and able to pop off. Real quick, we got 4 guys who did not make that list, but they are deserving of accolades. We're talking Marin, 2015 World's MVP, 369's got 5 LPL titles, Nuggery, World Champion and Impact with 9 domestic titles. Which of those 4 guys you think is the closest to cracking on to, the 7th spot behind everybody else?
Well, the LCS bias in me wants to say Impact, but I know well enough.
9 titles! 7 of them are LCS.
Yeah, it's not the same. It doesn't hit quite as much, but there is absolutely something to be said for the longevity in his career, despite being in a different region. But the way that he has played and been at that top level is something that is exceptional. Nuggery, with, of course, just the shortness of his career, is one of the things that is holding him back in that regard. When you look at what he did accomplish and how he was able to play in that time period, I think is obviously impressive enough to be in that type of list. 369, what do you want to say? My guy has been that, almost everything at that level just eclipsed by someone like Bin in the LPL at the same timeline has been rather unfortunate for him, but he has been a long stay, a long time as well, is one of those things that you got to be mentioning with him when you're looking at the top laners.
Lots of good choices to still eventually ascend into that top 5, but I think Zeus and Ben are safe as long as they keep on playing for a couple of years especially. But that is it today for Liga Unlocked. Eric and Mark here with you, absolute stunners. Thanks for hanging out as always, and we'll catch you on that flippity flip.